Okay, welcome. Welcome to everyone here in the room. Also, welcome to everyone who's dialed in online to join our today's event. For the sake of introduction, my name is Jochen Herrmann. I'm a partner at Baringa in Energy Resources, and I'm delighted to have you in this event today. Global Energy Perspectives Live. Is the energy transition in Europe at risk, and how do we respond? This is the topic for our today's discussion. And I'm really pleased to have a great panel and discussion partners that are on the panel later today to join us here. A small note, this event here today in Berlin also constitutes the official launch of the Baringa office in Berlin. So we've recently launched in Munich, also very happy to be now locally present in Berlin. And so I hope you'll all enjoy this event today. And we really want to make this a very open discussion. So everyone online, if you have questions you want to raise, please put them in the chat. Happy to address those. And obviously for you in the room, raise your hand, share the discussion, share your thoughts and ideas. That's why we're here. This is not a pure presentation. Very good. To kick us off, I would love to invite Ilesh Patel, my colleague, to have a short scene setter on the state of the energy transition in Europe. So Ilesh, over to you.
Thank you, Jochen. I could have made the mistake of falling on the chair, actually, which would have been very difficult. But the scene's very formal, so I'm going to make this a very relaxed scene setter, because I think we're all very familiar with the state of the energy transition in Europe and the energy vendor in Germany as well now coming under pressure post-Ukraine crisis, both around what we used to call the trilemma in Europe, the trade-off between decarbonisation or climate change and physical climate change, energy costs, and security of supply. And for at least 20 years now in Europe, we've been very lucky, actually, as consumers, that we've had cheap energy, relatively, and largely secure supplies. And of course, that's now all changed. So the context in which we're living and working as energy industry professionals has really changed. And I see it very much in the graduates that we're hiring in Spain and Germany today, in the UK, in Australia and Singapore, all the countries who all want to work in climate change and energy, but are now fearing an industry which is really facing into a security of supply challenge. But one of the points that I'm positive on, that I'm really looking forward to hearing from the other panelists on, particularly Christian and Pinar and others, around innovation. I think that's a really important part of our industry today. I think that can excite the next generation of talent that's going to help solve our climate change challenge, but also from important investors and developers in energy infrastructure like Martin and Paul, who can talk about what it's like to really build energy projects in a more difficult world that we now face into. The context I'm going to set in three parts, very briefly, I think in about 10 minutes to make sure we've got plenty of time for discussion and commentary. Part one is all about where we thought we were last year in 2021. Where were we? What was this like sunny lands that we were in of hope, and where we had COP26, there was plenty of good commitment. Where were we in 2021? How has the context changed? If you look across the major emitting economies, or the major carbon emitting economies across the world, China, the European Union, the US and India, where are they now from a transition, credibility, durability perspective? And then finally, more focused on Europe, is where do I now see some of the biggest opportunities and challenge is from a European perspective around the energy transition, particularly focusing on the next 10 years, where what might be prioritized, and hopefully that will set some scene for some of the other panelists and for the audience to challenge that view and or to support it and build on it. Great, so where were we in 2021? Well, 2021 was, for me, the high point of target setting. Everybody was setting targets around net zero and decarbonisation. Governments were almost, if I can say the English phrase, falling over themselves to set targets that were, I can be better than you are, I can be better than anybody else, without much actual substance behind some of the policies that they were going to put in place. What was substantive, though, was the commitments that large corporates were making, and this has such an important role. I think we often forget that decarbonisation will happen when companies use either less energy or you use less carbon intensive energy. Now, those two pieces are really important outside of the power system, which we know how to decarbonize using very mature technologies, onshore wind, offshore wind, solar, battery storage. Outside of that, the 75% of our emissions, which sit in the kind of real economy, industrial, manufacturing, transport, all those industries that we know generate large amounts of emissions today, many of those companies were setting very ambitious decarbonization targets for themselves. You look at, for example, what Apple, Google, and Facebook have signed up to in terms of decarbonization targets, negative emissions by 2030. And they were already taking real actions, signing real contracts in their power consumption, for example, trying to decarbonize their backup power, but also energy efficiency in some of their data centers. So a really simple, powerful example of the way the real economy, particularly manufacturing, and here in Germany with its manufacturing focus, manufacturing and industry have a real important role to play in directly changing our emissions pathway. And when we come on to it later, I don't think that changes because of the post-Ukraine crisis. In fact, I think it'll accelerate. The high energy cost that manufacturing companies now face means there's even more reason to move away from very expensive fossil fuel-based input fuels for either your power needs or your heating needs. So what's changed in 2022? Well, I think we're all well read enough in this room as energy industry professionals to know this context. I think what's interesting to observe is a lot of the high and volatile prices that we've seen post-February of 2022, post the invasion of Ukraine, we were already seeing in December and the winter of last year. And that was due to a huge surge in gas demand in China and Japan. So our gas prices in Europe were already rising. LNG prices were already rising in Europe. So we already started to feel the kind of first wave of impact from constrained gas world and high demand energy world out there. That led to several security supply challenges that particularly Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium were facing up to and living, but also started feeding into customer bills. So customer bills were already rising and were leading to, in that right, the first kind of debates amongst policymakers, governments, and regulators. How do we respond? If energy prices are rising, how do we respond to this? What the invasion of Ukraine very sadly has done is compounded all of that and made it 10 times, 50 times, pick your metric, worse. You know, so it's compounded a trend. The other piece of, I think, challenge that in the post-COVID world we were seeing last year and now coming into this year, pre-Ukraine, which has become worse after Ukraine, is supply chain. I know, Martin, you'll probably talk about supply chain later, maybe Paul, you will as well, around it's much harder to get all of the important component parts, steel, aluminium, manufacturing capacity, you know, solar panels, all those things we need to help build into the energy transition now than it ever has been, and it's more expensive because of a commodity price boom. So both it's harder to get global shipping to bring it to us, as we're seeing in our real life, but also it's getting more expensive. And that's going to impact the way and the pace of the energy transition over the next few years. So let's briefly look at kind of the four kind of global implications of the post-Ukraine crisis that we're now facing into. First of all, of course, the gas and power price shock. We know about that. Secondly, the impact of that gas and power price shock on inflation and GDP, i.e. the real economy, a reduced gross domestic product growth. Certainly many of the economies in Europe, look no further than the UK for how fast this is impacting us in terms of negative GDP, i.e. Falling GDP combined with high inflation. Thirdly, energy security of supply. In the UK yesterday, we had our first red warning that lights could go out and demand side management might be needed. So it's the first sign that finally winter is here and that temperatures are dropping. And so we could see over the next few months quite strained energy systems across Europe. And we've been working for several of the stock exchanges, a very simple example, who are really worried about their backup and data centers going out. So I think industrial players, manufacturing businesses are now, you know, blackouts weren't on the radar or weren't on their kind of planning horizon from a risk perspective 2 or 3 years ago. Now blackouts and security supply are very much in their thinking and planning from a risk perspective. And then finally, political tension. You know, we've seen in the Repower EU package, some of the policy debates around price caps and around windfall taxes across Europe, that the consensus we had amongst European countries, probably for 10 years, and within each country amongst most of the political parties, both in Germany, the UK, and France, you look across almost all European countries, and within those countries, there was a long period of consensus around energy policy and around energy market design and what to do in terms of the commitment around decarbonisation. And we're starting to see the first strain of that. And I personally don't think we've seen the end of that. I think we'll see more strain on that once, if we see a sustained period of high prices for the next 2 years, and I think we should plan on that, and some serious threats to security supply, including some blackouts where industry loses supply, or indeed small domestic consumers, you know, our households lose supply, you could see some real further strain being placed on the political consensus, which will then hit the energy industry. And I think that's the most serious threat for us, which is investor confidence, of course, and the market design impacts of that. Just stepping back a tiny bit around the kind of global picture and the state of the transition across different countries. I think it's easy to forget, because we sit in Europe, that the post-Ukraine crisis is affecting different regions in different ways. Actually, the US has done an incredible job, in my view, around the Inflation Reduction Act. You know, the amount of stimulus that's providing, but they're quite lucky. They're experiencing still quite low energy prices from a gas perspective and a power perspective, and their supply is quite secure. So they're in a very different context and planning in a very different context. China, of course, we know, both post-COVID and in the economy that now live, the next 5-year plan is committed to further decarbonisation, scaling renewables. We know China's coal plant are now on standby rather than operating, which is a good thing, but they're using increasing amounts of gas. But we're still, at least at personal level, I'm still sceptical about China's commitment to real deep decarbonisation. China will always prioritise economic growth and population over above decarbonisation, at least in the near term, and alive for local reasons where, you know, pollution can impact local economies. And India, I think India can often be seen as a laggard in this, particularly with its focus on coal historically. But the volume of new renewables capacity which India is seeking to build over the next 10 years is the equivalent of the entire European power system today. It's enormous. You know, you think the scale of the opportunity that exists in some of the transition. I think they've got very credible policies on credibility, durability. The question, will a change of government come, of course, in India and prioritise different policies, but Modi's government today is certainly fully committed to a solar and wind future, which they're putting money behind from an energy transition perspective. So then, last few minutes, just on the European Union. I talked a little bit about the trilemma, and I think the debate today that we'll have, hopefully, really is to recognise that energy prices are going to be high for quite a while, that security of supply needs to be maintained, and it may be that our emissions rise in the next few years. And in fact, our modelling, which we've just completed our Q4 update on our European power market modelling, and if you look back at where European emissions over the next 10 years, the pathway for European emissions in the next 10 years, our view today versus our view is that European emissions will rise very significantly for the next 5 years. Very, very significant. But, and here's the positive news that I'm hoping we can take away, we believe in the credibility of individual European country commitments to decarbonise the power sector very, very quickly in response to the post-Ukraine crisis. Gas will play less and less of a role in our power sector over the next coming decade. What that means, though, is we can have a faster transition in the late 2020s and early 2020s. And so we catch up in our modelling. Okay, now it's modelling, and it's based on a serious assumption, but we believe it's a credible pathway for us to have emissions rising now. It's not a good thing, but if we can catch up fast in the late 2020s by building the 350 gigawatts of renewables that we need to displace Russian gas, by providing the right policy frameworks for that, by innovating so that it can be integrated into the grid effectively, and by allowing large energy users to also be participating in that low carbon transition, there's a real opportunity for us to then be faster in our emissions reduction, decarbonise the entire power sector, potentially transport with it, and then reduce prices for consumers over the kind of 2020s, late 2020s, early 2030s. So we're going to pay a price now, which I'm hoping, and our analysis is showing, we can pay back over the next 10 to 12 years. I think we lost the screen again. So the technical glitch is going to keep going. So that's a great way to stop me talking, actually, because I can stop talking slides. So I think the analysis shows that the energy transition is going to be a bit slower for 2 or 3 years, but can be accelerated if we commit to the pathway now or on. The challenges, which I know we'll debate very quickly around, skip over these slides, that we're going to debate for the rest of the session, are the four at the bottom. Some of the headwinds we're facing into beyond the crisis, which is the higher cost of capital, interest rates are rising across Europe, supply chain constraints, government spending, will that get constrained? So how will governments respond? And particularly in Germany today, is there a pipeline of projects that we can build, particularly in the power sector, particularly given all the permitting, land and grid constraints that there are, and how do we resolve those? So great, hopefully that sets some context up for us, a brief context to allow the debate to flourish. There's lots more detailed data that we can get into, but with that, I'm going to stay here, I think, and I think Jochen, the panel's coming up, is that right?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ilesh. I think before we move into the panel, the question is, are there any questions or thoughts at this stage? That's not the case, then ask the panelists to please join us. Yeah. Okay, we've now heard a lot about Europe's ambitions to reach net zero in 2050, and I'm really happy to have a very experienced, diverse panel and panelist discussion today. So I would first like to start with a short introduction of the people we have on the panel today, and I would welcome Pinar Bilge. If you might introduce yourself quickly.
Sure. So you can hear me, right? So great. My name is Pinar Bilge. I'm working as a project manager at Stadler Railway Industries in Berlin. Stadler is a railway manufacturing company located at 8 different locations worldwide, and I'm happy to be here to talk about our technologies which we already implement and develop for the future.
Pinar, thanks a lot. Good to have you. Martin, welcome to the panel.
Thank you for having me here. My name is Martin Supancic. I'm acquisition manager at Sonnedix. We are an international IPP with over 2 gigawatts of solar assets in operation, all in OECD countries, currently covering approximately 10 countries. And yeah, we have very ambitious growth targets over the coming years. We want to more than double our capacity.
Thanks a lot, Martin. Welcome to the panel. Christian, a couple of words from you.
Sure, I'm Christian Bogatu. I'm with SPRIND, which is the federal agency for disruptive innovation. And we have a €1 billion budget to support teams and researchers and innovators that come up with breakthrough technologies to basically save the world. And we're sector agnostic, but a lot of the projects that we support are obviously in the energy space. Before that, I'm an entrepreneur. I started 5 companies, and my last one was actually in the energy space, where we created benefits based on smart meter data. It's called Fresh Energy, and we sold it to EWE in Germany.
Thanks a lot. And last but not least, Paul, a couple of words on you.
Yeah. So my name is Paul Hennemeyer, and pleased to be here, join the panel. I'm a managing director at Avrio Energy. It's a small developer that I run with a few partners. We have a set of renewable energy projects in different geographies. I've been in the space for more years than I want to recount, but spent a fair bit of time as a developer, also as a project finance person. I used to run the equity team at Siemens and also GE Capital. So pleasure to be here.
Thanks a lot. Great to have you. Paul, let me start with you.
Sure.
First question goes to you. We've heard about a key element of a successful energy transition will be the availability of capacity in producing power through renewable generation.
Yeah.
So what's your perspective on where we are on this?
So I guess to quote Charles Dickens, it's the best of times, it's the worst of times. I think that in general, we have some very, as Ilesh referred to earlier, we have some very, positive movements. I'm thinking now particularly in Germany with the new coalition, the initiatives that have taken to really ramp up substantially the amount of megawatts to install across technologies. Increased reduction of energy or improved energy efficiency, reduced carbon emissions and so on. And there are concrete changes going on at the legislative front, both in the Buildings Act, the Nature Protection Act, and so on and so forth, to make it easier for this capacity to come online. But there are significant challenges, as I think everybody in this room knows. I did a little bit of quick math to throw out a number. So starting in 2017 was the last time, I think as many of you know, the German Federal Network Agency runs a series of auctions for different technologies. And 2017 was actually the last year where all of the auctions were subscribed or oversubscribed. In the 23 auctions that have taken place since then, and I'm talking principally about onshore wind. I'm very interested to hear from Martin later on about solar. But for onshore wind, in 23 of those, 70% were undersubscribed. So a lack of projects and a lot of challenges around getting those megawatts built. On top of which, we face an additional challenge that some of the older projects that were built when the EEG first came into place 20 years ago are actually being taken off the network. So it is a challenge, but I think there's a substantial amount of sort of a mega trend that will push us in the right direction over time, but it's not going to be easy over the next couple of years.
Very interesting. Thanks a lot. I think you addressed nicely Martin in his role as a energy producer, developer. So Martin, what are your reflections on the question about how can we progress with providing power through solar?
Well, at least here in Germany, I would say, the government has provided a roadmap. We want to more than triple the installed capacity from here until the end of 2030 to 215 gigawatts. By the end of 2040, that is supposed to reach 400 gigawatts. We currently stand at about 60 gigawatts, which is as much as is currently installed in France, Spain, and Italy combined. And the 60 gigawatts have been reached over the last roughly 20 years. So to more than triple in 8 years is quite ambitious. It was already mentioned that there are different bottlenecks that affect the project development process. It's the permitting. One thing is what the national government wants to reach in terms of output. Another question is how national law gets transposed at the regional levels. There's also a question of whether the regional governments have the necessary professionals to actually look at all the different projects that are being submitted. There are plenty of examples. The most recent one actually in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, where there are, I believe, more than 60 projects that are awaiting approval for over a year now. We have the issue with obtaining necessary components, transformers, substations, which are also creating bottlenecks in terms of construction times. Obviously, inflation, CapEx, OpEx, interest rates making the entire investment process more challenging than what we had, let's say, 12 months ago.
I think you've raised a couple of challenges. We'll come to that as part of the discussion as well. I think it was a nice kind of introduction to, okay, where do we see the capacity being now? What's the opportunity? Where are we heading? Potential constraints as well. I think a second element that we want to touch on is around innovation. So we think one is can we create enough power from renewable generation assets? But the other might be how can the industry adopt and how can we kind of be successful through innovation? Christian, I'm looking at you because I think through your role at SPRIND, you might have a good view on this, and I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so in general, I'm positive that we can solve the issues in the time that we have left on this planet. Even given the restrictions that you already spoke about, I mean, just look at the regulations, and it's not so easy to build a wind turbine and to get the permit to do that. So we are working with an innovator who came up with basically a second layer for existing wind parks in 380-meter height, which is totally a novum in the world to do that, but that would basically not put additional problems in terms of finding the land to build the wind turbine. It's just a second layer in very high altitudes. And so that's one of the projects. Then we are looking at getting CO2 out of the atmosphere. And if you use biomass to do that, you're basically competing with other ways like agriculture or basically the land use. So we are supporting a project called Seafield, where they create large farms of algae in the middle of the ocean, basically the size of Belgium, yeah, where they offshore, basically on the in the middle of the ocean, there's going to be the plant as well to on a boat to get the biomass and to transform it into methanol or other sources, basically, or other chemicals that we actually need. And you take out the CO2 from the atmosphere and you create a product that you can actually sell. And that's, we think, a way to move forward and solve the issues that we have and be commercially viable as well at the same time. These are just two examples. And every day I speak to great innovators and amazing super brains, I call them, that have the mental capacity and they actually want to save the world. And that's just great. And we have the funds and also the context and the political context and in the industry to support them. And so whenever you guys or anyone out there listening, you have a great idea, approach me or approach my colleagues at SPRIND.
Sounds so exciting. I want to invest in that. That sounds like a really great project to invest in.
Yeah.
I thought it's interesting. You could spend a couple of words on the role of SPRIND in this thing, I think.
So our role is basically, if you break it down super simple, like what does it take to create a breakthrough innovation? It's a lot of things, but if you break it down to three things, it's technology, it's funding, and execution power. And technology, that's not the problem. We have in Germany, in Europe, great research institutions, Helmholtz, Fraunhofer, great universities that come up with awesome stuff all the time. It's more the funding and the execution that is the issue in Germany. And here is where SPRIND has its role. So we have €1 billion budget, as I said, and we have we support the teams with the execution power. And as an advisor or a consultant, you can only do not that much, right? You can tell them, hey, you need to move this way. So we created now a co-founder program for these super brains to match them with a super execution hero, right? And now that's the ideal combination for, I think, a successful creation of new unicorns that at the same time not only are commercially viable and probably the next BioNTech, let's say, but also help save the world. So that's the role of SPRIND in a nutshell.
Thanks a lot, very useful. I think I would like to invite Pinar into the discussion because when we spoke earlier before the event, you mentioned at Stadler Railways a project which is called the Flirt Akku Train. And this sounds for me very exciting, interesting. I would love to understand more what it is about. And I think it definitely falls into the category of innovation.
That's definitely Great, true. So what we make at Stadler at the moment is that we make use out of new technologies, right? So we see what kind of innovations do we have on the market or across the research institutions, startups, and so on, and how can we bring it to the market? How can we make use out of it in terms of energy transition, more or less, but anyways on alternative drive technologies, for instance. And Bogatu is a great example for energy battery electric multiple unit as a train which drives on a B-modular mode, which means that we use the sections of the rail where we have the electricity to charge the batteries, so we can overcome these sections without the electrification. And one of the examples in this regard was that we had a world record about 224 kilometers on battery-driven section. And so hydrogen is another topic where the market is now on and exploring a lot of new solution approaches. So I would definitely agree with you that is okay, let's get first the technology, proof of concept, and then see how can we bring it to the market, make use of it, and support the energy transition in this sense.
Yeah, or actually also vice versa. So sometimes we see that there's a lack of solutions to a major problem. For example, long-term energy storage or long-duration energy storage. That's a major issue to support the energy transition. So we, as SPRIND, we not only wait for people and we approach people that are these super brains to come up with ideas to that projects that we can support, but we also come up with challenges. And in this case, we just recently chose 6 companies that are all working competitively on long duration energy storage. And we support them with about up to 4 million euros each over the next 3 years. And it's basically a way for us to say, what is the biggest problems that we're facing, the biggest challenges? And then we basically call out this challenge, and people from not only Germany, but actually all over Europe, and now also Israel, also the United States, and we may also go into Asia at some point, can apply for this support from SPRIND. And yeah.
It's such an important part of the energy transition, this balance between investing in mature technologies that we know are commercially scalable today, solar, wind, that can help decarbonize, versus the hundreds of different technologies that could be part of the future. And how do we distinguish which ones are going to be the winners? Do we run a competition like Christian's running, or do we pick a winner and say it's going to be hydrogen? It's going to be hydrogen.
We believe, and actually we stole that a little bit from DARPA in the United States, this philosophy, but our philosophy is we bet on the race, not just the horse. Right. So I think that's the way to go and to be successful as a state, I mean, we are state-owned, right? And to pick not just one winner, but support 6 companies that do the same thing.
I'd be interested in the other panelists' views on, but if there are a lot of people advocating for a horse being hydrogen right now, as one example, another horse being direct air capture, all our problems will be solved. We just capture the carbon from the air and store it. It will solve all our problems. We won't have to worry about renewables. Don't worry. Technology will come and save us. Like this magic unicorn horse, if you will, right? Will come and save us. Do any of us believe that there's a magic kind of, single horse that can save us out there?
I don't think there's going to be let's say a silver bullet that is going to be the solution to all our problems. It's going to be a mix of different solutions, and in the solar as well as the wind industry, we've seen how efficiency has increased over the years. Wind turbines have become larger and larger. The same with the efficiency of solar cells. Newest trends, higher efficiency per hectare or per square meter. As soon as these technologies become commercially viable and are mass produced, investors such as Sonnedix and others are going to roll them out. There's lots of potential. Chinese at the moment are at the forefront, but let's not forget that Europe and even in the US you have very bright scientists, and there are plenty of companies that are developing innovative solar solutions that at some point will probably also be employing.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, not to switch the topic, but augment the topic on innovation. Yeah, I think there's also, when I look particularly in an area that I spent some time in, long duration energy storage, it's just one example where I think there's a little bit of a need for some regulatory innovation. There are, and this is all extremely unsexy and boring work, but it's essential to make these technologies marketable. So for example, with energy storage, which is a key element of the energy transition in Germany and elsewhere, it's been held back, not by design, but almost by mistake in Germany by being double taxed. When you charge in Germany, you're considered an energy consumer and you get hit with the tax, and when you discharge, you're considered a producer and you get taxed again. So it's made, I appreciate some of these things are changing and there's recognition of the problem, but without boring the audience too much, I could run through a whole series of regulatory obstacles that are embedded in German and EU regulation where if I were king for a day, I might put together a SWAT team to really go through and try and remove some of these obstacles so that the technologies that Christian is working on at SPRIND actually can find a home, because the energy transition issue or the storage issue is critical, and it's not, there's a massive market waiting to happen if we can refine and innovate a bit on the regulatory side.
The reason for that though, Paul, right, is we've got 20th century energy markets trying to deliver a 21st century problem.
Right.
All of our energy markets across the world, and I spent the first 10 years of my career designing energy markets because I was this geeky economist coming out of university who wanted to design energy markets, like this new thing called designing power and gas markets. Those are all in the 1990s, essentially by East Coast academics, right, from Boston, largely in Massachusetts, who would academically design the perfect energy market with marginal pricing, with location-specific pricing. This was people were writing PhDs on this stuff in the 1990s, and then they implemented them, and then the problem changed. The problem through the 1990s was how can we ensure competition? That was the exam question in energy markets, and largely to underpin investment, but they didn't really care about investment. They just said competition is the king. And the European legislation at the time, first package, second package, was all exactly the same. Encourage competition. If we had competition, competition can save us. So your race is a really good analogy, Christian. I love it, right? Because it was the race. It was like if you had innovation will come from competition. What we have now, though, is a fundamentally different problem set where innovation can't take off and scale can't take off because the problem set has changed. So that 20th century markets trying to solve a 21st century problem.
I think on this regulation topic, I know that Pinar, you have a brilliant example where we also talk about regulation, but across European countries, which definitely creates the current times a constraint for innovation also to go live and go to market. I think if you want to highlight a bit
Yeah, sure. I can also add another example of train operations, right? So if you cross borders through the European Union, you will see no standard timetables. You won't see even any technologies where you can drive on the rail with the same technologies. Just a simple example, in some countries you have to have a mirror to look on the track, and in other countries you are not allowed to look at it. So all of the operations, all of the assets you design and also operate must be able to cover both conditions, right? So, and that's why I'm also on your side that we say, okay, regulations can help. Of course, they can give some frameworks. On the other hand side, we need some standards which can help us to operate in multiple sectors. Energy sector is one of the other best examples in this sense. So, and if you look over the places, John Worth is, for instance, an activist, a European activist who has been crossing all European borders in the summer, and he has found very simple issues which could be just solved with a couple of €100 probably. And of course, there are also huge issues where we need an investigation in the infrastructure for multiple millions or billions of euros.
Yeah, I think with the regulations, it's very difficult because from my experience at Fresh Energy, we had too much regulation as a problem and not enough regulation at the same time as a problem. So too much regulation when it comes to smart meters in Germany, which is almost the same level like the Berlin airport when it comes to disaster. And then the second problem was not enough regulation if you compare it to the US, where our competitors in the US had very much support from the government, where they were saying every utility has to save X amount of or X percent of energy. And so obviously everyone tried to support or to get partners that help them reduce the energy. And that's what we did at Fresh Energy. The customers that were using it were saving 10% of their energy in their homes without even noticing. And if there was this regulation like there was in the US, this would have been a whole different story. So it's very difficult talking about regulation. Yeah. I'm not a friend of regulation in general. But,
perhaps I'd just like to add a couple of ideas. I mean, if Germany has often been the example to follow in terms of renewable energies worldwide. I mean, they were at the forefront of implementing the Renewable Energies Act, and today about 75% of installed capacity, PV capacity in Germany is actually rooftop, which is quite high. You don't see that, for example, in the Mediterranean basin, which is quite strange because you would expect that given the amount of sunshine hours, you would have a lot of solar capacity there, which is not the case. And so I think Germany has done well in the sense that it has enacted legislation that would spur the deployment of renewables, different technologies. And another more recent example is, for example, the EEG 2023, which incorporates, let's say, allows repowering to be implemented on a much simpler scale, not with all these, let's say, technical studies which were required in the past. And that is, I think, going to also increase the potential of historical assets, that date back to the early days of the renewable energies industry in Germany, to just double the installed capacity. And that's going to, I think, boost also the output of the coming 24 months.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I think we've naturally moved a bit into the discussion around challenges. We'll definitely come into the discussion around opportunities and the positiveness in this discussion as well. But we have a very experienced audience as well in the room here. So I was wondering if there's any builds on what has been discussed so far.
Come on, Stefan, you come from a developer background, building offshore wind in Germany, Hamburg, onshore wind, international experience.
Well, in general, I agree with these discussions about those regulation topics. What we are currently also observing here in the energy market with power purchase agreements where I'm working with, so that it's not enforced so much that large corporates or also mid-sized corporates can interact with the energy market itself. So that the market also needs to push there forward, that also smaller and mid-sized companies can participate in the market and can become actively part of the energy transition.
Thank you. While I'm up from my seat, any other perspectives or views?
Any views on innovation or even markets, whether markets has a view here?
Thank you. Two additional risk factors that I would like to talk about. One is hopefully short-term and one possibly more long-term. First is the skimming of windfall revenues, which will be introduced. And the question is, to what extent will that hamper the transition? Will it prevent investors from investing? And the second one is demand-side flexibility. I mean, we're talking about tripling the capacities, which means that we will have more fluctuating energies. We've already discussed about long-term storage, but what about demand-side flexibility? Do we need to become smarter there as well?
Absolutely. Flexibility is super critical. I fully agree.
So you had your first question, one was on flexibility, and the first question, I'm sorry, was on the windfall. Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I think one of the huge advantages of the German economy in general, but the energy sector has been this Rechtssicherheit, right? The legal stability, which people almost take for granted here, and there's very strong constitutional protections, and there's a little bit this attitude, well, retroactive changes and windfall things, that's something other countries do, but we don't do it in Germany.
Mainly Spain, of course.
Yeah, I didn't want to name names, but so I think it's potentially can set a bad signal. I appreciate the government's under political pressure to do something, but I think there may be more elegant ways to help out, particularly those consumers and parts of the economy that need it without imposing a big tax. And also, as we know, I think it's, is it Lichtblick or somebody is already taking this issue to court, so it could become a messy court thing. So in general, everyone, the government in particular, is more than happy to see people just making as almost a zero margin on 30 euros a megawatt hour. But the minute it goes to 300, then it's a big catastrophe. So I'm generally not in favor of these kinds of things because I think it's one of the great benefits of investing in Germany that you have that stability. So that's all I'll say there.
And maybe on the flexibility issue, we see a lot of projects that will help to make sure that industry processes do not need to be continuously run, right? For example, the sintering of ceramics with 1,600 degrees, you cannot just switch off the oven. It just needs to run the whole time. But we are supporting one project where the inventor came up with a way to, instead of 2 days putting the ceramics into the oven at 1,600 degrees Celsius, he would just use a special light, a black light, for 2 seconds, and it has the same effect. So much less energy consumption, but more importantly, or similarly importantly in terms of flexibility, you can just switch off immediately the process if needed, and then resume the process again, the production again, like in the next 15 minutes, if it's possible again, or half an hour. And similarly, production of methanol, which is the second largest input source in the chemical industry, and will increase demand tremendously when the shipping industry starts, like Maersk announced that they're using methanol ships by, I don't know, 2050 or even earlier. So if you produce methanol, it needs to be continuously normally, but not if you have new ways. Like another project we support is called Carbon One. It's a Berlin-based startup, and they allow also for this continuous process to create this green methanol. So that is an interesting aspect where flexibility always is part of the design process as well.
Thanks a lot. Good. Pinar?
I would like to comment also on the flexibility question. From a railway manufacturing perspective, we set on modular concepts, for instance, right? So that we can offer products where we can use different kinds of sections. And as well as your question about the horse, just in advance to answer that, I think many solutions can run continuously for a while until we can see, or let's say get some experience which one is the more beneficial one, in which conditions, under which circumstances, and that gives also a flexibility to set a modular concept with different for different circumstances in different ways of the world.
Yeah, I think on the demand side, there's multiple studies, and I've worked with innovative technologies on demand side across EVs, demand reduction, demand increase, change of thermostat temperature. None of them work. And the reason they don't work is because human behavior is very hard to change. And so what you really need is technology is the answer here, and innovation genuinely the answer, which is someone to take away the problem for you, which says, I have an EV, I have a solar panel, I have some storage, I want the temperature to be 21 degrees, and I want my fridge not to melt the ice, but apart from that, you can do what you like. Okay, you can change all the ambient conditions, you can change my Hoover can go off at 2 o'clock in the morning, it doesn't matter, right? If you have a robot Hoover, by the way, it's a cool technology. But it's essentially what humans want the problem to be taken away from them. And if that can be combined with some cost saving by linking it to the market price for energy, I think there is something there. But I've yet to come across a good technology solution that can do it properly.
I have an idea.
I knew you'd have an idea.
So there is a company called 1,5 grad, 1.5 degree.
We know them.
And they are actually installing the heat pumps. They are installing the sockets for charging your EVs, and they're installing PV and the storage at home. And those are the three big contributors that can help you run demand-side flexibility. And they not only control and build this, but they can also take advantage with a home energy management system of these flexibility opportunities that are created from these large Verbraucher, what's that in English?
Consumers. Yeah. And the windfall tax point, so Jochen, just on the windfall tax point, because I'd be interested in Martin's view on this as an investor, right? Because this is the hardest challenge, which is we will have to have some form of tax, no doubt. Someone's going to have to pay for this energy that we're now consuming that's costing more. And we know it's going to. So who pays? Will it be through tax, or will it through the energy bills, or some other mechanism? And there's a very honest conversation that needs to happen, which is if you make higher profits in the near term, we might take some of those away from you now for the long term, giving you more support so that you don't lose money in the long term. And I think investors in solar projects and wind projects could have that conversation, right? You could say, I'll take a lower price now compared to the market price, but I want a higher price in 10 years' time when I've got more risk in the future. That's a very honest conversation for government to have with developers and investors. But it requires a new framework that doesn't exist today, because everything is based on auctions and that's not a framework that can sustain that decision to really get together with the industry and say we need 100 gigawatts, by 2030. Here's how to build 100 gigawatts.
I need to move this conversation. Martin, this last one for you, then I'm going to move this over to drinks.
Okay, that's a very challenging topic actually. The windfall tax is affecting probably all of Western European energy markets. And there are some that argue, oh, it's because energy markets are not efficient. But in effect, energy markets are signaling, hey, we need to invest more to bring down the prices. So if you take away the profits, which we as investors use to reinvest in building capacity, you take away our, let's say, our muscle to spur on the energy transition. So yes, I'm not a fan of retroactive measures. I think I would also hope that the German government would not enact something that would be considered retroactive. As Paul mentioned, if there's one thing about Germany, it is the reliability of the regulatory framework. It's probably the only country in Western Europe that has not suffered any retroactive measures and is considered a safe haven for investors. And I would hope that that would continue to be so also in the future. So yes, I think as an IPP, we are conscious about the effects the energy crisis is having on the populations in the EU, and you know, everybody has to chip in, whether it's the windfall tax or perhaps a different setup. I think should be discussed, as Ilesh had already suggested. There are other solutions, but we have to do something. That's for sure.
If I could just add one postscript to that, Martin, and then we go to drinks. I don't want to be the guy preventing people from having their drinks. I would say one, and this is obviously forward going, but I've always been, I think even now, the design, the contract for difference structure in the UK, which is a two-way contract for difference. So you get your price, if the market price is below the price that you bid in your auction, you get a top up from the government. If the market price goes above that price you've agreed in your auction price, you pay the government. So when market prices go to 300, the UK government is getting money back from that. And I've always felt the two-way CFD, as they call it in the UK, is a very, very elegant design. And I think it should be treated much more seriously by the government. But anyway, so that I'll stop.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I feel really bad in cutting this conversation short now, but we have plenty of time in the evening to continue that.
Sure.
I need to be conscious that there's people online who might have planned to leave us. So, but I don't want to cut it that short. There's still a short round left for every one of you to spend 10 seconds on your final statement about, is the energy transition in Europe at risk? And what puts you positive that we will actually get to achieve the ambitious targets that the European Union has set? Martin, you want to get started?
I think the first step is to identify or be conscious that there is actually a problem. And once you have done that, you can discuss solutions. So I'm quite hopeful that Europe will be able to find solutions. I think we've done so in the past, and at least here in Germany, I also see there's a political will. So I'm quite optimistic that the right decisions will be taken.
Thanks a lot, Martin. Pinar?
I will focus on the positive side and say we do have a lot of technologies which we can already bring into innovations, into useful products for the market, for the people, for the societies. So let's empower those technologies for this issue.
Thanks. I was thinking renewables were going to be the savior, but I've now been convinced by Christian and Pinar that the innovation is going to save us actually. And over the next few years, there's going to be an enormous amount of startups in Berlin that are going to come and save our European transition.
Ilesh, Paul?
Yeah, I would say I echo all of those sentiments. I would say that there's still a huge emphasis placed on the supply side, on the Erzeugung. And I still think there's so much untapped potential on the demand side to help us reach our targets. And hopefully we can begin, and I'm interested to talk to Christian later, about regulatory and technology tricks that can really unlock the value on the demand side as well.
Thanks a lot. Christian?
I think it's about breakthrough innovation, and it's about the people behind it. So that makes me very optimistic that we can solve the challenges. So if there's anyone in the audience or with you guys or listening, reach out to me if you have great ideas that we can support.
Smart brains, right? That's what you want. Is that right? Smart brains. Smart brains? Is that?
Smart brains is what you want.
Smart brains.
Yeah.
Good. At this point, I need to say thank you to everyone on the panel. Everyone has come to Berlin today or into this room to discuss. Looking forward to continue the discussion with everyone who's in the room. Thanks a lot for everyone who joined us online today. Hope you enjoyed it. There's a bit of marketing in the end, obviously. So we're doing webinars on a frequent basis. If you want to listen to Ilesh and some of our colleagues going forward around European power markets, here's a link or a QR code for you to scan, and happy to join. There's also always information on our website where we're going to share. We hope you enjoyed the session today. It was really good to have you, and see you next time, or over canapes and drinks.